The topic is Marcus Garvey and Africans in the Caribbean, and we're talking to Dr. AAl-hadid, the chairperson of the Africana Studies Department at Tennessee State University. Dr. AAl-hadid, during this last segment, let's give you an opportunity to talk about Marcus Garvey and his influence and some of the influences that helped to shape Marcus Garvey as well, and some of the influences that his personality and his vision helped to shape as well. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Yeah, when we left off, we said that Marcus Garvey entered this country in 1916. Mm-hmm. Now, it was a time where we were moving toward the Harlem Renaissance, when Harlem, was in vogue. Mm-hmm. And Garvey came to this country and started his organization called the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Mm-hmm. And the time period of Garvey's most powerful influence in this country was between 1916 and 1926. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about within one decade, here's a man that using the power of the spoken word, saying, up you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will. One God, one aim, one destiny. Africa for the Africans at home and abroad. He was able to mobilize more than 6 million people of African descent around the world. I mean, he literally had thousands of chapters of the Universal Negro Improvement Association inside the United States. Garvey's basic vision was to create a United States of Africa. This was during a time, we're talking about right after the First World War, when imperialism was entrenched in Africa. They needed the natural resources there in Africa. The Germans had fought a war against the colonizers in order to colonize the colonizers, which failed. And so Garvey now is coming to seize Africa. And as he's agitating to seize Africa, decolonize the Caribbean, he becomes a big threat in this country. And he became so much of a threat that J. Edgar Hoover infiltrated this movement, and for the first time in the history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he actually hired an African American with a code name 800, not just an informal person, but a person actually on the payroll to infiltrate his organization. And when his organization was infiltrated, they accused him of mail fraud because he had started the Black Star Line. This was a big shipping company that he wanted to put together in order to do trade between the Caribbeans and Africa and African American side of the United States. And Garvey had these very grandiose designs. He was full of pomp and pageantry. He knew how to raise money. Very, very charismatic. He had the type of charisma of, say, a Martin Luther King or a Malcolm X. But he could just stand on a street corner and just move thousands of people. And he was very powerful in that regard. Now, his organization was composed of West Indians and African Americans. And as you know, sometimes West Indians and African Americans don't always see eye to eye. So you had this type of tension in the organization. You also had tension in the organization around the question of people who were educated and those that were uneducated, people from the South, people from the North. And there was some corruption in the organization because he surrounded himself a lot by people that he could trust, but not necessarily people that were competent, people that were loyal to him, but not necessarily competent. So that was part of his undoing. And he built the organization around himself rather than delegating responsibility and leadership. And then there were some areas where he didn't have competencies, and so that created this problem inside of the organization. But when he was eventually arrested for mail fraud, he was taken to prison in Atlanta around 1926. And when he got out in 1928, they sent him straight back, they deported him rather, back to Jamaica and told him he couldn't come back inside the United States. So after 1928, his power inside of this country and around the world started to wane in terms of his organization. But his vision did not go away, because you have to remember, while he was talking about uniting people of African descent around the world, Du Bois was also organizing his Pan-African Congresses during the 1920s as well. And so they were working concurrently. Du Bois was organizing the intellectuals, and Garvey was organizing the masses of the people. Yes. He left Jamaica because by the time he got back to Jamaica, he tried to start up some businesses. Many of them failed. And he was just somewhat, a period of time he was a hero, and then the other period of time, that sort of waned and the people turned on him. So he left Jamaica and went back to London around 1935. And so he pretty much died there in London. A very interesting incident happened in January of 1940. He had a massive stroke. And while he was trying to recover from the stroke, George Padmore the author of the book Pan-Africanism or Communism, who's, I think Pat was also from Trinidad, put an obituary in a column of a paper inside this country saying that Marcus Garvey had died, and they put his obituary in the paper and everything. And when he read a copy of that paper in June of 1940, he had a second massive heart attack, and he died, you know, because he died a person who did not really accomplish all he set out to accomplish. He never actually went to Africa, even though he wanted to go to Liberia and claim that republic and start his base there. He wanted to go to Sierra Leone, but he never got on African soil. The closest he got to Africa was London. And so in that sense, he died pretty much a tragic, tragic hero in a sense. But at the same time, in 1935, while he's in London, another person is at Lincoln University by the name of Kwame Nkrumah. He picks up Garvey's book, The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. He reads this book thoroughly. In 1945, he goes back to the Gold Coast and starts to implement the vision of Marcus Garvey. In other words, you can kill the dreamer, but you can't kill the dream. So the dream of Garvey was reincarnated on African soil in Kwame Nkrumah. And then when he got independence for Ghana, in 1957, March of 1957, he actually adopted the flag that Garvey created, the red, black, and green. And if you look at the flag of Ghana now, they have the same colors except there's gold in the middle because Ghana is known for gold. And they also have the black star sitting right inside of that flag. So Nkrumah was definitely inspired by Garvey. We had other movements. The Moorish Science Temple movement with Noble Drew Ali was inspired by Garvey. And of course, we know that Malcolm X parents were part of the Garveyite movement, and that's how he got his early indoctrination with Pan-Africanism and Islam. And then toward the end, after he left the Nation of Islam, then he went back to establish his organization called the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which was modeled in a certain way after Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association. So that whole Pan-African dream, or if you can talk about people like Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, also from Trinidad, inspired by Marcus Garvey. So the children of Marcus Garvey are still very much alive.
So there's a real legacy.
Oh yeah, there's a legacy
that you
Garvey
talk about
created.
now when you talk about.
And he inspired Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya to create the Mau Mau and bring about independence in Kenya. So the book, the jury is still out in terms of the impact of Garvey on people around the world. And then of course when Maulana Karenga creates Kwanzaa, you know, he adopts the colors of red, black, and green. You have the red, the green, and the black candles, and also the bandera, which is Swahili for flag. So they adopt that flag. So Garvey's influence is still here. And every time you see someone walking around with red, black, and green on, or a flag, or an armband, or something like that, or a cap, you know that's the influence of Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey influenced Bob Marley with the Rastafarian movement. So he picked up the colors of Marcus. Of course, Bob Marley was also from Jamaica. He grew up in Trenchtown, but Garvey was a great influence on Bob Marley as well.
And I think, Dr. AAl-hadid, we might say that even some of the more popular activities that Africans are involved in, African Street Fair Festival, for example, all in a real sense can be said to go back to that period of, with the influence of Marcus Garvey, the economic influence, and et cetera.
There's no doubt about it, yeah. And also with the creation of the Organization of African Unity on the African continent, which is a framework designed to unify Africa. And you can trace that back to Marcus Garvey as well.
Well, now, what can we do over the last minute and a half, Dr. AAl-hadid, to make Garvey's career much more public? It seems that only the historians and people like yourself know about Marcus Garvey. What would you suggest over the last minute that we have that could be done in order to sort of resurrect Marcus Garvey and his influence?
Well, one thing we're going to do with the 11th Annual Africana Studies Conference is that Saturday, which would be the 4th or 5th of February, we're going to have a Garvey Marley concert. And that's going to be an annual feature of our annual conferences to make young people more aware of the teachings of Garvey. I mean, I use Garvey's philosophy and opinion in my classes, and I constantly expose students to that. So in the small way in which I'm working, I'm trying to make Garvey's ideas effective. And then we need to have more conferences and meetings centered around Garvey's idea. Because a lot of people think that Garvey was just talking about putting people on, African Americans or black people on ships and then taking them back to Africa. His plan was much larger than that. He was talking about creating the United States of Africa, and then where African people are, they can still relate back to the motherland, even though they might remain in the African diaspora physically, spiritually, and in culture. They
and of course, Dr. Al-Hadid, we're out of time again, as you generally know. And let me thank you for coming by and giving us that excellent information about Garvey and some of his activities. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.